Flashback to 1 month ago. The Capitol Center loomed high above the bustling street, its glass facade catching the late afternoon light. Li Yuan paused at the entrance, a modest travel bag slung over his shoulder, before stepping inside. He introduced himself at the front desk, and the receptionist, without so much as looking up from her screen, acknowledged his arrival from the Li Bramji Center. Only when he confirmed did she glance at him, quickly, sharply, as though the name carried a faint scent of suspicion. She asked if he had received his issued watch, then slid a card key across the counter, explaining his access permissions. Her voice faded into the background as his mind drifted back to the conversation that had forced him here. He could still hear his supervisor's blunt dismissal. "Li Yuan, how many times do I have to tell you to do your job properly? Don't you want to keep working? I'm sending you to the capital." End of discussion. There had been nothing to say. He had simply turned back to his desk, quietly packing his things, when the murmurs began to ripple through the office. "I heard he's getting transferred to the capital. He wasn't even good at his job. How did he get sent there? Must have kissed up to the manager. Some people have all the luck." The thought still felt bitter in his mouth. If this was luck, it had a strange way of showing itself. Perhaps his manager thought the silence of Bramji was wasted on him, that a storm like the capital would suit him better. The receptionist's voice drew him back to the present. He was to live in room 903, sharing with an A-class guide named John Walsh. The arrangement displeased him. He asked for a single room, offering to pay for it, but the rules were firm. Singles were reserved for those of higher class, and not all A-class guides even qualified. The logic seemed as arbitrary as it was irritating. The dormitory was a short walk from the main building. Standing before room 903 with key card in hand, he considered the fact that staff here were required to live on site. So much for choosing his own accommodations. A sigh escaped him as he knocked on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, and still nothing. Sliding the key card, he stepped inside. The scent of stale snacks and alcohol hit first. The sight was worse. The room was chaos incarnate. Music thundering from a speaker, bottles scattered across the floor, wrappers carpeting the coffee table. In the midst of it, sprawled on the couch like a corpse in casual clothes, lay a man, snoring. So this was his A-class roommate. The man stirred, blinking at him with the bleary disorientation of someone who had woken too soon. Recognition dawned, followed swiftly by condescension. He closed the space between them with a swagger, crumbs tumbling from his shirt, and made it his mission to lecture the newcomer on proper greetings, rank hierarchy, and the rules of the capital. Li endured it with silent disdain until the man's arrogance pressed too far. He told him plainly that his manners were trash, the bluntness drawing a rare moment of speechlessness. The tension was broken by the shrill beeping of Li's watch. An emergency call flashed across the screen. Room number 5, urgent. At this hour, it seemed a likely error, but his roommate's irritated demands to ignore it only strengthened his resolve to leave. When the man grabbed his shoulder, Li swung his travel bag up and into his face. He offered a polite apology as if he didn't do that on purpose, and he left without another word. The Capitol Center was alive with motion, staff rushing past, voices clipped and urgent. At the front desk, the receptionist quickly confirmed his class and synced his watch with the system. There were 8 injured espers and only 2 available guides. He would be starting with a critical case. Following her down the corridor, Li felt the pressure in the air increase, an almost tangible weight. From one of the rooms ahead, a faint, oppressive energy bled into the hall. Inside, an esper lay trembling on the bed, uniform clinging to his sweat-soaked frame. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Li moved to his side, asked how long he had been in this state, and received a vague, pained answer. For hours, perhaps more. The watch on his wrist chimed softly, showing contamination level at 51%, matching rate at 35. A standard B-class pairing could bring that down to 10 without difficulty. He decided that it's best to keep it unremarkable. He set a hand lightly on the esper's wrist, channeling energy with precision and restraint. The dark haze surrounding the man began to dissolve, the ashen pallor giving way to a healthier flush. Within minutes, the patient's breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, the oppressive air lifting. When asked how he felt, the Esper murmured that he felt alive again, only to notice moments later that his contamination had dropped far more than the match rate should have allowed. He stared at Lee in disbelief, but before questions could be asked, the receptionist's sharp voice cut in. Lee was apparently in the wrong room. He had been meant for room 702, not 104. The system here operates differently, she told him that orientation should have made that clear. And it was becoming obvious that he had never received one. As she pulled him along, she asked if he knew who was waiting for him. He did not. Her answer stopped him mid-step. It was Tae-Hajin, the infamous S-class Esper. Lee insisted that there had been a mistake. B-class guides were never paired with S-class Espers, but she silenced his protest and said there was no mistake. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor. A tall woman in a dark uniform waited to escort him. She was a cleaner, one of those rare non-powered individuals who could sense energy, and in a place like this, their value was immeasurable. They walked toward the room, and the moment he drew close, the pressure hit him like a wall. Heavy. Oppressive. He raised a barrier instinctively, giving himself a heartbeat to adjust. Outside the door stood several guides, pale and trembling. It was not hard to see the truth. They were being cycled in and out not to heal, but to bleed away the Esper's overwhelming power before it tore him apart, or anyone else. Lee's jaw tightened. Guides had never chosen this ability, yet they were ranked, sorted, and used like disposable batteries. And no matter the training, a rank was permanent. In this system, their fate was fixed. So why, he thought, are they treated as if they were less than human? Just then, a cleaner stepped out of the room, her expression unreadable. "Next," she said flatly. Lee lowered the brim of his cap and moved forward. He intended to do this as he always did, quickly, quietly, without drawing attention. The moment he stepped inside, the weight in the air intensified. The energy was not merely oppressive, it was suffocating. His heartbeat picked up as his eyes adjusted to the scene before him. Tae-Hajin sat in the bed, silent and unimpressed, a cigarette loosely held between his fingers. In front of him, a guide knelt on the floor, his face slick with sweat, hands trembling as he tried to channel energy. Lee noticed immediately that the Esper was making no effort to contain his power. He sat with the ease of someone accustomed to being served, his expression blank and his gaze distant, while the guide before him fought to stay conscious. The room was silent except for the sound of strained breathing. No one else present moved or spoke. Lee had heard stories about the capital, rumors of physical contact during high-efficiency sessions, but what he saw here was different. This was not just energy transfer, it was a display. There was no privacy, no courtesy, only the raw, relentless force of power being drawn in full view of others. The guide in front of Tae-Hajin gasped, his breath catching as he struggled to continue. Tae-Hajin took one final drag from his cigarette and flicked the stub into a tray without looking. "You gonna keep going?" he asked, his tone laced with boredom. "No, sir," the guide stammered. He scrambled to his feet, nearly stumbling in his rush to leave. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. All eyes turned toward Lee. It was his turn. He stepped to the side of the bed, his movements steady and professional. "I'll begin the guiding now," he said. "First, I'll check your contamination level and matching rate." Without waiting for a reply, he reached for the sheet and pulled it up, covering Tae-Hajin. The Esper blinked, exhaling a sharp, deliberate sigh through his nose, but he said nothing. Lee ignored the reaction and began the scan. His hands moved with precision, syncing the readings to his watch. The first result appeared, showing the contamination level, at 57%. The level was high, and surprisingly so, given how many guides had already been through. He continued, holding the Esper's wrist lightly as the system calculated the match. Moments later, the watch beeped again, showing the matching rate at 81%. Lee paused for the briefest moment. Across from him, Tae-Hajin's gaze shifted to the display, registering a flicker of surprise. That's a relief, Lee said, allowing himself a small, controlled smile. It's been a while since I've had a match that high. Inside, though, the result unsettled him. Of all people, why did the match have to be this high with Taehajin?